I am happy to share that this week's episode is sponsored by Beducated. They're like the Netflix of sex education. And if you keep listening, I'm going to give you a really good discount code.
So today we're going to be talking about, sexuality and consciousness, which I'm really excited about. And, I almost named this podcast, sex and consciousness or something along those lines, because I think that exploring consciousness is something I'm passionate about. This idea of sort of awakening from not being fully aware and going from, everything that's handed to us, we just kind of accept it, or we're not questioning things, to really realizing like our power as individuals and knowing that we can make conscious choices and create what we want to create for ourselves and in the world. And in our sex lives. So that's what we're going to get into. Before we get into it though, a couple things I wanted to mention. So for the last handful of episodes, I have been putting 2 or 3 related episode links in the show notes. So whether you're new or not, if you're kind of like, ooh, I really like this episode, I want more like that, go to the show notes and you'll get recommendations that will, be episodes that have a similar vibe. So for this episode, I'm linking back to episode 10, where I talked about the sexual placebo effect and law of attraction. Episode 16, Healing Through Seduction with Pearl Noir, where we incorporate some kind of spiritual concepts and spiritual growth and healing. And then episode 28, where we talked about BDSM, play parties, and queer sexuality with Kessiana Boom, where we get into also a lot of like questioning norms and being conscious and going after what you want and being intentional and all of that. So if you are looking for more amazing episodes, you'll find those there. You can also find them on my website. We'll have all of the links and notes for each episode there. So for this episode number 35, it's going to be heathershannon.co/E35. And it'll be like that for every episode. So again, heathershannon.co/E35, and you will find all of the links that you could ever want. And then for the review of the week, this one says, such a great find. This podcast is fantastic. The host builds such a great rapport with her clients. I think this is about the episode where I coached Vanessa, and I love that we get to hear how these sessions go. It kind of takes the fear out of finding a therapist for the intimate moments in life. Love, love, love this podcast. Thank you very much for the review. And I wanted to use this to point out that yeah, it's okay to go to sex therapy, right? It's okay to have a sex coach. It doesn't mean something's wrong with you. Basically what it means is you're on this consciousness journey. You're kind of like, wait a second. All of these things that I've been handed about how relationships are supposed to be, how sex is supposed to be, are not factual, are not accurate. I mean, some of it probably is, right? But maybe they're not serving you in terms of what you're wanting to create with your sex life. And you're like, hey, there's got to be another way. And there is, and you know where to find me, right? Instead of looking at it like, oh, is something wrong with me? Look at it like, wow, I am like taking action in my life to create what I want to create and to get the education and information that I deserved back in the day that I didn't get, but now I have access to. So that's why I wanted to share that one. All right. So we're going to start by getting into the Hawkins scale of consciousness. So I first came across this actually when I got sick in Puerto Rico last year, was really having a hard time. And a health coach recommended this book to me after talking to me a little bit. And it's about levels of consciousness and, emotional states and, our perspective. Really, that's how you can think of a level of consciousness is what is your perspective on the world, right? Because you might have 100 people who experience the same thing in a day. And actually the Letting Go book by David Hawkins talks about someone getting in like a fender bender in a parking lot, I think. And he goes through, hey, if you're at this level of consciousness, here's how you react to that. If you're at more of a, medium one or a high one or low one, here's how you're going to react to that. And it's fascinating because I think our human minds can get so stuck, and mine too, right? On, like, oh, I got a new client, or my podcast is doing well today. Today's a good day. Or, I didn't hear back from that client, or, I was trying to network with someone and they missed our meeting. Like, oh, today's not a good day, right? And we can become so conditional on our circumstances. And so what I love about this level of consciousness is that it's something that is at least somewhat in our control, that we can be intentional about and choose to be on a growth path with that. And I just think that's so much more empowering, and it's so much more focused on, what is it that we can control versus our circumstances, which actually only account for about 10% of our happiness. Isn't that fascinating? It's not that they cover zero. Like certain circumstances or situations might make it easier to have better feeling thoughts or easier to have a good perspective, but still they actually only account for 10% of our happiness, which I think is fascinating. So doing this kind of work on your own perspective is going to account for much more. And the other piece is our health, right? And it's interesting that I kind of found this scale of consciousness due to health issues. And, there's just such an interplay between our thoughts and our physical state. So when my physical state was really suffering, it was hard. It was really hard to have good thoughts. It's like I was struggling to eat. I was struggling to breathe well. And then at the same time, I knew I kind of had to improve my thoughts to help improve my physical state. And so I think that those two pieces together, sort of like, genetics, epigenetics, physical wellness, thoughts, perspective, that's the other 90% of what makes up our happiness. So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into some qualities of self-energy. And then we're going to talk about what does it look like to become more conscious and, kind of embody our own internal higher consciousness when it comes to our intimate lives. And I feel like this could be a long episode. So I'm just going to say that now because I do want to also share my own personal experience with, how did I used to approach sex and like what kind of level of consciousness was that at versus how do I look at things now? And hopefully I'll keep evolving, right? I don't think I'm definitely not done evolving. So let's get into the Hawkins scale of consciousness. So I'm going to start by just kind of going through this chart, like a map of consciousness. I will share the chart in the show notes, so don't forget that. We'll kind of go through it somewhat quickly. And so the list is numerical. So when David Hawkins created this, it's a 0 through 1,000 scale. Okay. And so I'm going to let you know the point value. So 0 means like very low vibration. 0 is like dead, like you're not even alive, right? Higher vibration means like you are just vital and vibrant and full of life, really. So we're going to go through the name of the level, the number associated with it, what is sort of the predominant emotional state, what is sort of your view on life, and any other sort of details that I might add.
So speaking of sex and consciousness, you guys might want to check out beducated.com because they have 20 courses related to Tantra, which is actually a big part of why I became a sex therapist, because I thought Tantra just seemed so cool, like this awesome intersection of sexuality and consciousness. So I just watched one called Transcendent Bodies with Barbara Corellis. It was amazing. These people are having these, ecstatic, really high vibration, breathwork orgasms, and that I haven't really seen anything like it, to be fully honest. I was super inspired. I think you guys will be inspired. And I was really just reminded that, what we're taught in kind of like mainstream culture is such this narrow, limited view of our bodies and our ability to connect and our ability to experience ecstasy. And so, having these platforms like Beducated where we can expand that definition and expand those horizons is so important to me. And so that's why I'm so happy to be partnering with them. So if you want that 40% discount, like I promised, you actually also get a free 24-hour trial. You're just going to go to beducated.com and you're going to enter the coupon code ASK, A-S-K. And you can also find the link in the show notes. And I can't wait to hear what you think when you check it out.
All right. So the bottom level is shame. So shame is at a level of 20. And I think we all kind of know what shame is. It's kind of like almost feeling embarrassed about our existence. And I want to make one distinction before we go too far in this. There's a difference between experiencing the emotion of shame occasionally versus being like, that's the state that you like live in and that's your perspective on the world. So as I'm going through these, what I'm saying is this is the perspective on the world. So if you're like, I experience shame sometimes, does that mean I'm at the lowest level? No, you probably experience many of these. What you want to kind of pay attention to is what is your predominant perspective on the world? And be curious about what would it look like if your predominant perspective moved up a level. The next level after shame, where you're kind of just embarrassed almost about your existence and just feeling so like you're just awful, is guilt. We can see guilt. You're still not feeling great about yourself. So any level under 200 is kind of, you're kind of stuck in this survival world. That's your perspective. It's like just trying to get by. Most people are under 200, right? I think when this was originally created, David Hawkins said about 85% of people are below 200. But the really interesting thing is, even if you're I think what I had just read was, even if you're at a level of like 300, you're counterbalancing 90,000 people who are like below the 200 level. Isn't that wild? So sometimes we look at the world and we think, oh, well, most people suck, or, women suck, or men suck, or there's so many terrible things happening in the world. But I find this to be super, super hopeful and empowering, because it's like, if you can just do the work of moving up the scale, you become so magnetic. You're like radiating. That's how I think of it. It's like radiating out this like good energy that benefits everyone that you come into contact with, which is just beautiful, I think. Okay, so don't get too discouraged while we're going through the lower levels. That was my point with that. Guilt is the next one. That's at a level of 30, and that's obviously where you just kind of keep thinking like, oh, did I do something wrong? Or did I hurt someone's feelings? Or, there's maybe a little questioning of yourself, or even just assuming like, I am just guilty, I'm wrong, right? Next level we have is apathy. Apathy is at a level of 50. And so apathy, there tends to be almost like a learned helplessness. Maybe you had tried in the past and you just feel kind of like defeated, and there's sort of a giving up hope, right? So there's just kind of I don't know, like, does anything even matter? And like, what's the point? And things like that. So maybe some despair. So the next level we're going to look at is grief. That is at a 75 on the 0 through 1,000 scale. Grief is going to be, and again, this is if it's your predominant state. Typically when I think of grief, I think of, someone died, you lost your job, you realized you had been miserable for years just because you hadn't forgiven yourself. And then you finally forgive yourself. And there's like this grief over all those years that had been lost. So it doesn't mean that that's not healthy, or we don't want to ever feel that. But what it does mean is, if that's your predominant way of being, it's pretty depressing. So I almost think of this level as like depressed if you're consistently, almost constantly in a state of grief. So there's sort of this tragic feeling along with it. So then moving up from grief, we have fear. So the level of fear is a 100. You probably feel pretty anxious. So I actually think of anxious as being fear. A lot of times we think of them as separate, but when we're anxious, we're worried because we like fear that something bad's going to happen typically. And so seeing that connection, I think, can be really helpful too. And so it could be anything. It could be, I'm afraid I'm not going to have money to pay my bills. I'm afraid that people won't like me. I'm afraid that I'm going to say something stupid. I'm afraid of being alone forever. I'm afraid of never having really good sex. So whatever the fear is, again, if you're just having a passing fear, that doesn't mean this is your state of being. But when this is your predominant perspective, this is kind of how most of your day goes, right? And so to just notice that, if that's the case. So as I'm going through these, notice, okay, we've probably all experienced shame, guilt, apathy, grief, fear, right? But where do you tend to live? Where are you like, I probably spend at least 50% of my time there. So notice that. So next we have desire. So this one, I think, they all need caveats, right? So desire, there's a difference between just wanting something, like a goal, like, hey, like I want to complete a marathon. Cool. Well, that's different than like an addiction or a craving, or just like really jonesing for something. Like there's this neediness, like I'm not okay without this thing. There's a sense of scarcity. Like I have to make sure my needs are met, because, a lot of times they aren't, or I'm not going to be okay. And so that's more of that desire level. So that, and desire is 125. That's the level of frequency. So the next we have anger. And anger, I do think, is kind of a pivotal one, because you go from such a low energy vibration where it's kind of hard to take action. It's a little bit more paralyzing to taking action. So when we think about big movements or changes that have happened politically, right? If we look back to Black Lives Matter, if we look back to, women being able to vote, it's like, first, people had to get pissed off. People had to be like, this is not okay, right? And so again, the important part is we don't want to like live in anger. We don't want to stay there forever, but we can appreciate it as a catalyst, right? And so that's kind of the distinction here too. And you want to notice, do you live in anger? Is it like, this person sucks, this person wronged me, this group of people is awful, I hate these people, where there's sort of this almost like revenge or, aggression coming from sort of an unhealed place. Again, doesn't mean we don't want to experience anger, but we don't really want to live there permanently, okay? So then the next level, and the last one that's below the 200 level, where we're kind of almost trending downward or trying to like force things to happen in our lives, is pride. And I'm thinking, we just had Pride Month last month. That's not what I'm talking about. So pride is more like, I know what's right and other people don't know what's right. Almost like a little bit of, inflating yourself and looking down on other people a bit. It's like, I've got it figured out, and if only they knew. It's kind of like self-righteous, really, is how I would look at it. So that's at 175 calibration. I hope that's helpful for you guys. Again, I love this topic. So reach out to me if you have any questions about it or just kind of want to discuss it more. Hopefully it was worth it for you guys.